Something's really wrong when you're a lawyer, you're paid to think and you're paid for your knowledge and your expertise, and you just couldn't do the work.
You're most passionate about empowering female lawyers to burn bright and not out.
Like, I actually thought I wasn't going to practice again.
You thought it was going to be your dream job.
I actually told my manager that I think I need to resign.
What you were experiencing at the time was later diagnosed as mild depression, anxiety, and burnout associated with your work.
There were probably many yellow flags that were coming up that I ignored.
Today's episode is sponsored by VXT, the phone system built for law firms. VXT integrates with practice management systems so that when lawyers make calls, their billable time and legal advice can be saved in the right place automatically. 20% of billable time goes unrecorded. A lot of that is phone calls that get forgotten about. Get some of those billables back using VXT. Go to vxt.co.nz or click the link in the description to find out more.
Amy, you are a lawyer, a podcaster, a founder, author, a facilitator, investor, and a mentor. And there's many more things I could add to that list. But what you're most passionate about is empowering female lawyers to burn bright and not out. I'd love to delve into this today and pull out some really practical pieces of advice for our listeners. But to start off, can you share your journey in law so far?
Of course. And thank you for having me on your podcast as well, Sophie. It's a real pleasure. So my journey in the law thus far is that if we rewind the story a little bit, I was first introduced to the world of law when I was in year 10, so about 15 years old, visited a magistrate's court and was just captivated by how someone could stand up and advocate on behalf of someone who didn't have a voice or didn't know the law. And so that's where the interest was first sparked, and went to university, did law as a postgrad, and then started out at a city firm, a very small city firm, and did my traineeship year there, worked in insolvency and a bit of litigation, a bit of property as well. And I was always interested in employment law as well, like throughout university. I thought it was a kind of a lighter version of family law in some ways. I thought maybe it wouldn't be as emotional. And so I was really trying to find my way into that different area, and had an opportunity come up in a suburban firm that was closer to my house, and really dug my heels into learning that skill set and that area of law. And so employment law was where I was at for a time, and still doing a bit of property litigation, insolvency, and then moved into an employment law class action firm, which was a startup. So a little bit different vibe, different culture, and did that for a year, and then actually moved into what I thought was going to be my dream job in employment law. Stayed there for about 15 months. It was in this particular firm that I did experience burnout. And then now currently, we can dive into different parts of the story, but I took a bit of a break from practice and then came back and now work in property and commercial, and a sprinkle of employment law is what I like to call it. So that's the law part of the journey, and there's so many other stories along the way, I'm sure. So that's the brief summary.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great summary. And pulling out a few pieces from that, you switched the practice area that you were working in from when you first started. And often lawyers are determined to progress fast and think that switching practice areas might hinder this plan. Did you have any hesitancy in switching practice areas? I know you were going into employment that you were really passionate about and wanted to be in, but did you feel like you might have been slowed down or anything by making that decision?
Great question. And that was definitely one of the considerations I had when I was contemplating it. But I think sometimes if you stay in a particular area that you're not really passionate about, it starts to grate at you. And I think over time, even though it was I think I was doing litigation, insolvency, and property for about 2 years. And I think there was just this niggling in me where I was like, oh, but I really wanted to try this area of law. And I knew that it would in some ways set me back in skill set perspective. But I thought if I didn't do it then, I'd probably just be stuck doing what I was doing for the rest of my career. And I think I'm the kind of person who's, if I don't give it a go, like I'll never forgive myself kind of thing. Yeah, I think it is a real thing that you do need to, I think in every decision that you make, like you got to weigh up the pros and the cons. And then if I think the benefit of it or the thought to do something different is still weighing heavier, then my perspective is give it a go. And if it doesn't work, you can always you can go back to what you were doing. So that's my perspective.
Definitely. And I assume there'd always be those base legal skills that you'll be able to transfer and build on from any experience or team that you might be in. And so you mentioned that you've worked in a suburban firm, an inner city firm, and a startup firm, and they all had their own kind of unique culture. How do you think that workplace culture influences the well-being and productivity of its lawyers?
Such a great question. And it heavily influences lawyers' work well-being as well as their sense of worth, I think, in the workplace. So I think if I compare the different places that I've worked with, I think the ones where I have actually enjoyed going into work have been ones where there have been a safe environment where people feel like they can be themselves. They don't have to put up a front, or even if they're going through something, that there will be some support for them. And then as a flow-on effect, you feel like you want to be there and that you want to champion the vision of the firm and the clients as well. If you are going to have a meeting with a challenging client or something like that, that you're going to afterwards, you can debrief with someone, that you're not going to be told, oh, just suck it up or just be left to like process by yourself. Like you can have some camaraderie, like with your team members, with other people that you work with. But on the other side of the coin, like when you don't have that around, it can be you could feel quite isolated and feel like you're the only one who is carrying this particular burden or this load. And that can lead to just feelings of, like not feeling like you're connected in to a bigger hub. And also it can also make you feel like, oh, no one really cares, like whether or not I turn up to work or not. And that can lead to people feeling like they don't belong there and may move on to another workplace that may actually value them a lot more. So I think it does actually play a huge part in terms of like workplace culture. I'll just share one story if that's helpful. But I was at a Wellbeing in Law forum that was held in Melbourne recently, and someone shared this story of how there's two fish bowls. And so one fish bowl, there's like clean water, the fish are happy, they're healthy swimming around. And then there's another fish bowl that is quite dirty, no one's cleaned it, the fish are swimming on their side, all that kind of thing. And then what happens sometimes is people then, okay, like we need to take that fish out of the dirty fish bowl, rehabilitate it, look after it, give it a lot of love and care. And then after it's all well, then they put them back into that dirty fish bowl. And then of course, like over time, that fish is going to get sick again. So it's not, and I think that's such a beautiful picture of understanding like how important culture and like environment like affects our well-being. Because even if you're, say, going to the gym and doing a lot of meditation and all the things to look after yourself, if you're in still a toxic work environment or one where it's not healthy, then you still over time, you'll decline basically. Yeah, that was a really helpful picture for me to understand the impact of culture on a person.
I really like that analogy. It helps you picture it a lot more, and it's probably a good way to explain it to a whole law firm, for example, to people who might not understand what it might actually look and feel like for some people in the culture.
Yeah, definitely. And on that point as well, but hopefully it also shows that each individual has an impact on the culture as well. So sometimes, even if it's everyone else is happy and feeling supported, but if one person is maybe in a leadership position or something like that, but they're, either passive aggressive or feeling, or just like always feeling like they're they're the only ones doing the work and everyone else isn't helping out and things like that. That can also, just that one person can affect the whole culture too. So it's just also recognizing that we each have a part to play in creating that safe environment for our colleagues as well.
Definitely. I really agree with that. At one point in time, you mentioned before that you experienced burnout and you decided you really needed to take a step back and prioritize your health. And what you were experiencing at the time was later diagnosed as mild depression, anxiety, and burnout associated with your work. What were the warning signs that made you realize that you needed to pause and that it isn't normal to feel like this all the time?
So when I reflect on the journey, there were probably many yellow flags that were coming up that I ignored, but some that I can recall now that if I had paid attention earlier, may not have led all the way to needing to take a break from practice. So some of the things were a lower sense of what they call self-efficacy and like feeling like you can't do the work or there's something wrong with you, or I just feel like I can't do what I know to do, and I'll just push it aside and be like, oh no, I just need to keep moving, keep doing the things. I think feeling disconnected from your work as well, because actually when I first joined this particular firm, I was so excited, so ready to do the work, and the work itself was actually quite engaging, and it was employment law. It was working towards my whole career up until that point. And so within about 3 months, I think there was a senior associate who I was being mentored by. And so she left the firm. And I think that really shifted the culture of that particular team. And I just realized that, there just wasn't a lot of support there that was happening from the leadership. And I think I slowly, felt disconnected. And also I was working really late hours, so I wasn't looking after myself then. And then there was just feeling like you're exhausted all the time. So these were some of the warning signs that I think if I had picked up on that earlier, then the story could have turned quite different. But what really put the nail in the coffin for me was after taking a week of leave we were in 2021, so it was the year of the lockdowns here in Melbourne, or second year, I should say. And we had a gap in between lockdown 5 and lockdown 6 is what I like to remember it as. And we could leave the state of Victoria. And so I'd been able to go away on a short break and then came back and then was sitting in front of my computer looking at the screen, back to work, and being like, the best way to describe it for me was like my neurons were firing, but they were not like connecting and doing what they needed to do from a work perspective. So I intellectually, I knew how to do the work, but I just physically couldn't do it. And so that's really was the major indicator for me that something's really wrong. When you're a lawyer, you're paid to think and you're paid for your knowledge and your expertise, and you just couldn't do the work. So I think that was really the sign where I was like, something's really, really wrong now.
And that would have been really difficult as well, considering you thought it was going to be your dream job and you would have had the high hopes and expectations and almost pressure on yourself to be thinking that it was still your dream job.
100%. Yeah. And it's that sense of hope deferred, as some people like to call it. It's just like you were hopeful and then it just didn't happen the way you expected. And that can, even almost mourning that dream that you had and going through a period of grief during that process as well. And also questioning yourself. You're like, oh, did I make the right decision? Like, the grass is always greener on the other side. So you can definitely think, oh, maybe I should have stayed at that previous firm, or maybe it's time to move, those kind of things. And so there's a lot of things that your brain can start creating many stories and many different ways you can go down.
And when you were growing up, say when you were studying at university or even school, do you think that the pressure that you put on yourself then, if you did put pressure on yourself then and your work ethic then, was one that could lead to moments of high stress and burnout back then? Or was it something that only really came to fruition in this particular moment in time?
Another great question, Sophie. And so I think looking back, childhood and uni, I think I did definitely put a lot of pressure on myself. I think particularly growing up in an Asian household, there was a lot of expectation to do well in school, to make sure you get the top grades. And I also played a lot of music as well growing up, and going for those exams and wanting to be your best was very much ingrained, I think, in my upbringing. And I definitely think I took that in to my university years. And then also, I don't think I experienced burnout per se, but I definitely remember in law school having a panic attack. And it only happened once, but it's probably once is enough in some ways. And just like maybe before an exam or something like that, and just feeling, just couldn't, just started crying basically, just not in the exam but like at home, and I was crying uncontrollably and shaking and just couldn't breathe. And I think at the time I didn't even know I was going through a panic attack. It was just like everything's going wrong, and my parents were there thankfully, and they calmed me down. I think that's probably the first time I felt like the overwhelming sense of stress and how it manifested in my body. And then, so at the early start of my legal career, I also had a side hustle that I'd started, which was around the creative arts. And it was really stemmed out of wanting to turn my hobby into a business, a small business. And so I think I definitely burnt the candles at both ends when I first started, because when you begin anything, there's a lot of excitement and exuberance, and you can do the 9 to 5 job and then go home and work 5 to 9, those kind of things. And over time, I definitely experienced that feeling of like exhaustion. And there was another incident, just waking up one day and having massive pain down my back, and then realizing that after I'd gone to the GP that there was an infection that had spread to my kidneys. Not fun, not going to go into that. But it was, probably another wake up call for me to be like, oh, something I'm doing isn't working right now and I need to make a change. So I think for a lot of high performers, and like particularly people who are lawyers, when you reflect on your journey, like to think about, have there been those moments that you've been, oh, something happened here that brought me out of equilibrium, and maybe I need to pay attention to what my body's saying to me.
Your body's definitely a telltale sign for everything that's starting to go wrong, or when you really do need to take a step back. And when you decided that you needed to get help and it wasn't all feeling okay and how it should be, what did you do to get help, and what did that look like?
Yep. So the first time I really was like, okay, I need to do something, was like that moment that I mentioned to you, staring at the computer screen, not knowing what to do. So I sat in that space for almost a week, but I had a really supportive partner, and I was just explaining to him what was going on. And he was just like, yeah, I think you need to leave. And I had a whole bunch of other things that was pointing in that direction. So the first thing I did was I actually told my manager at the time, or the partner I was working with, that I think I need to resign. It was out of the blue for her, so she didn't actually take it quite well. But the day after, she did suggest to me to seek out EAP, which is employment assistance program that a lot of larger firms or may have available. And it was the first time I had actually sought out EAP, because often we don't think that we need it until something really bad happens. I wonder if I had spoken to someone earlier when I was starting to feel some of those yellow flags, perhaps, that it could have made a difference. Who knows? But when I did speak to that particular counsellor, the good thing is that EAP should generally be all independent. So I think that was one of the fears that we can have, is that, oh, what if I share something private, like with the counselor, and that it goes back to management or something like that. And so I think, at least in my situation, what should normally happen is that they're not supposed to say anything. It is supposed to be completely independent. They're not an employee of the firm. They're a service that is connected, like the firm should be paying for that service. And so when I spoke to that counsellor, it was the first time I felt that there was an independent third party who heard me out, firstly, and then also acknowledged that what I was feeling wasn't normal, and that there was something wrong, that you could actually make a choice and make a different decision for your health. So I think that was really helpful for me. And then after that, so we also had a plan to get a GP referral and to actually go through a mental health checklist to basically say the things that she suspected, which was there was some mild depression and anxiety connected with work and also feelings of burnout. And then, so that was the second step. And then I think after that, there was a period of time when I was off practicing, when I wasn't practicing. But eventually I did reach out to Beyond Blue, which is an organization here in Australia. And they have a particular program for people who may feel like they don't feel ready to go see a psychologist or a therapist, but they want to talk to maybe a coach, a mental health coach. And so that was another service that I specifically engaged with as well, which was really helpful because they helped me identify what are the symptoms, like when I'm starting to feel anxious, how do I address those feelings and move through them? And also, when I'm feeling those negative thoughts that can lead to depression as well, like how do you defend yourself like from that, but also know how to, I guess, if you can see it in others, how can you help them or point them in the right direction? So those are the few things.
Definitely. And it's having that third party who's independent is definitely important when often lawyers think about the career repercussions it could have if they are in a toxic workplace. Thank you for sharing that. There's some really helpful pieces of advice. Something that did come out of the moment of burnout you had, the positive thing that came out of this was that you started a podcast, Live Life. What was your motivation in starting that? And can you share a little bit about what the podcast is about?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the podcast itself actually started in May 2020. So it was actually pre the burnout situation, but it was part of my wellbeing journey because, like I said, prior to that, there had been that moment of burnout where I had that infection in my body. And so it did start this interest in what does it actually look like to be well in all areas of life. And at the time, I'd come across a model called the 6 dimensions of wellness. And it's really simple. There's so many variations of this, like the wheel of life, and is a very common one where it's just looking at different facets of your life and how you're rating in each area, and then what can we improve. And so I used the 6 dimensions of wellness as the foundation of my podcast, which was asking people, like who have a level of success in different areas of life, how do they grow in, say, your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, and those kind of things. And I carried that podcast through that year that I was in that toxic work environment. But through that, it really, firstly, like there were a lot of people who reached out and said they were really impacted by the podcast and found it was very helpful, and it opened just a whole bunch of conversations for people to start thinking about how are they, like, outside of the work that they do, which as lawyers, it is important. It's a big part of our life, our careers, and what we do for our clients. But then you have other aspects of your life as well that need to be nourished and looked after as well. So I think that's what started. And then it was interesting. It was just before, maybe a month or two before I ended up leaving that workplace, there was that inspiration to start a virtual wellbeing summit. So that was, again, birthed out of the experience I was having, and also wanting to just share the knowledge that I had gained. And the great thing was that I had a whole bunch of podcast guests that I just reached out to and said, hey, I'm running this wellbeing summit online. Would you like to be part of it? And it just rolled on from there. And we had about 126, I think, women who joined the Facebook group that we had started where it was facilitated. And so it was just a great opportunity just to be able to just bring to awareness. I think the starting point is awareness of the fact that we need to, if we want to be well in our job, if we want to do well in our job, we also have to look after these other facets of ourselves as well.
Yeah, that's a fantastic turnout you had for your first event. And I really like how you structure the podcast around those 6 dimensions. It's nice to have some sort of structure to it, and you can build on all the different sections of it in different episodes. And can you share at a high level what it is that you do today other than still practicing as a lawyer?
Yes. So it has evolved over time. So when I first left legal practice, which I thought was going to be the last time I was practicing law in August 2021, I was on the trajectory of building burnout prevention consultancy, coaching practice. And I did that for a little while. And so I had some private clients, had some group clients, group coaching calls. And it was still in the midst of that I realized I was still a little bit burnt. I shouldn't say a little bit. I was still quite burnt out. And so it was very ironic in some ways of trying to build up a burnout prevention business while still being burnt out. Once I got the help I needed, we put that on pause for a while, started back in legal practice in a much more supportive working environment, 3 days a week. And then it was around that time that once things settled down, I started having the opportunity to speak about sharing my story, sharing things that have been helpful in my journey. And so did a number of speaking engagements over the last 12 months. And that has led to now working specifically with a corporate client of mine and with their women in leadership team, just once a month at the moment, coming in and sharing on topics that actually help women in their careers, in their workplace, just in life in general. And so that's really the main focus from the business side of things. But I have had a real interest at the moment around more the financial well-being side. And I'm still working out how to balance it all and how it's going to be incorporated in the Live Life Well movement itself. But I reflect on the journey as well for me and why I stayed in the workplace for that particular toxic work environment for as long as I did. And part of it was financial. Like I didn't feel like I could leave because of the financial impact it would have on my life and my partner's life. And so I think actually educating like women in particular around their finances is actually a big part of what I feel passionate about. And this is the whole breadcrumb thing I was talking about before. And so I've been really for the last over 12 months, been really educating myself around investments and how do you actually work smarter, not harder? How do you actually build wealth that is sustainable, particularly in an environment where the economic climate is not great, cost of living is increasing. And so that's where my journey has led me right now. And so the Live Life movement, I think, is almost like a hub, I feel like, for different educational pieces. And like I said, I love burnout prevention. And I think part of it for me is actually helping people understand that there's a different way, that you don't always have to feel like you're locked into a job that maybe is stifling you in so many other areas. And if you can be savvy with your finances, you can actually create other pathways out for you, either to a better job or to work less, if that's what you want to do.
Love it. I love to see its progression and kind of building on all of that. First of all, thank you for sharing your story. It's definitely beneficial for everyone listening to hear someone else's experience, as it might help them recognize signs in their own, and kind of building on your experience and your skills that you have developed over time. I'd love to go through the timeline of when someone might start to recognize they're burnt out and how workplaces can help and how someone can heal, and try pull out some practical pieces of advice. And I want to start that with recognizing signs of burnout. We mentioned how you started to recognize your signs of burnout and your orange flags, but how do you think that lawyers can differentiate between normal work-related stress, because lawyers are in a very high stress environment, and differentiate that with the onset of burnout?
Good question. So I think there is definitely stress, and I had a stressful day yesterday at work myself. There are going to be peaks and troughs, I think, when it comes to how busy you are and how stress affects you. I think if it's been something that you've progressively been feeling over a period of time, say maybe over a month, and there's no end in sight, I think that's probably where it's probably the how long, like the duration of you feeling that stress. And because I think if you are constantly in that high stress, fight or flight environment, that your cortisol levels go up, obviously. And then that can lead to that feeling of, okay, if there's no end in sight, like what's happening with my body, and operating at that high stress environment consistently can lead to that burnout, feeling of burnout, or feeling, okay, there's something wrong, that it's out of balance now. So I think, and just checking in like with either the people who know you well, say your loved ones, your friends and family, and say, this is what I'm experiencing right now. What do you think? And because I think one of the things that I realized, so my partner said, oh, you're just not yourself. That's another key indicator. If someone's, oh, you're just not yourself anymore. And that could, whether that just means that your zest for life has dwindled, that could be another sign that you're on that path to burnout. Just nipping it in the bud or just making some changes can really just help with dealing with that level of stress that happens in the workplace. So those would be my preliminary thoughts around that.
Great, thank you. They sound really practical and good flags to keep an eye out for. And based off your experience working with women particularly, or even your own experiences in any profession, do you think that there are any common triggers or stresses in a work environment that can contribute to burnout?
I think a lot of it is relational, actually. So I think that often it's not the work itself, it's the people. So we talk about culture. So triggers, I think because we're all such high performers. So I think sometimes when there's like a critical comment made, particularly for women, I think it can really go to the core of almost our identity, because then we can think, oh, I'm not good enough. That's a very common one, I think, for women. I'm not smart enough, or all this negative self-talk can be triggered by, say, some kind of critical feedback. So I think it's learning to be able to almost recognize and separate yourself from, okay, this is the feedback, but this is not who I am as a person. Maybe it's the work that I've done, or if I made a mistake, it's okay. Obviously, like in the context, if there's some drafting errors or something like that before it goes out to the client, it's okay to make those errors. It's better that you're making those errors in the safety of your firm than it's gone out to the court or something like that. So I think it's just that can be a real trigger point for people. I think that can lead to the stress. I think that there's also sometimes recognizing that things that are happening external to the workplace, and sometimes bringing those into the workplace. So whether there's been some breakdowns of relationship at home, or if there's been a passing of a loved one, those things can also, when you're in the workplace and if you're doing stress-inducing work, then it can compound itself. I think it's just being, again, aware of what your body is telling you. And everyone has different triggers as well. I don't know, for Sophie, for yourself, have you noticed anything for you that's the trigger?
Mine's when I just work myself up about not having enough time. If I think I've got like a full-on schedule, that would probably be my trigger.
And I think time management, yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that I have found helpful is time blocking. Not that you were asking, but I was like, time blocking, and even like scheduling things like sleep, or scheduling walks, or like scheduling downtime. And that in itself, like when you've got that in your calendar, can also help with reducing stress, because you're like, or at least the feeling of overwhelm, because then it's, oh, I know that I'm going to have a break here now, or on the weekend there's just going to be a block of time just for me. And so I think that can help mitigate that feeling of overwhelm.
I have just started doing my calendar blocking in my calendar, and find that if you put in when you're going to go exercise on each day, then I feel like it's not going to get pushed to the side because it's scheduled and gets given the same priority as other things in my calendar that it should be just as prioritized as. So moving on, you start by recognizing you might have burnout, and then a next step is speaking about it or getting help. And the law industry is really competitive, and there's sometimes a hesitancy of sharing mental health struggles, and in other industries definitely as well. Do you have any tips for initiating conversations with colleagues or friends about mental health in a way that feels comfortable and productive?
The conversations about mental health, I think that if it hasn't been a topic that you've brought up with before, it can be quite awkward. If you feel comfortable, if the person who's listening to this is like really struggling with their mental health right now, and it's not a topic that is talked about with colleagues normally, or even with family members, whether there is an opportunity to actually just go to that independent third party, I think that it can be helpful, because then it's okay, it doesn't affect my existing relationships. if that makes sense. So it's okay, this third party, I can say whatever I want to them. And in Victoria, like we have the Law Institute Victoria actually has like a counselling arm. And I think most law societies or law bodies in New Zealand and Australia should have that. So just knowing that you could talk to someone who should be impartial, like there's nothing and it's not going to affect your existing relationships, can help. For some people, it might be a step too far because it's just, oh, why would I want to talk to a stranger? Like they don't know me, all those things. So if that's the case and you don't feel safe talking to someone else in your immediate circles, I actually find writing out my thoughts helpful in terms of processing. And that could just be a very safe way that you can start allowing, in some ways, feeling the emotions is important as well. Because I think we suppress so many things and we don't allow ourselves to feel, and that actually makes it worse. Again, another analogy that I heard yesterday was particularly when it comes to anxiety, like when we're feeling anxious, often we tell people, oh, don't worry, just it's okay and all the rest. And that's actually just a form of pressing down, say like a beach ball, right? If you pretend the beach ball is the anxiety. So if you say, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine, then you're like just pressing down someone's anxious thoughts. And the thing is, eventually that beach ball's wanting to pop up again. It's not like it's all of a sudden gone when you say, don't worry about it. So I think finding some form of outlet, like I said, third party, writing it out, and hopefully the person is listening, maybe, if you have a colleague that is, you feel like is a good friend, just to have a chat with them about it. Obviously, the challenge sometimes, like you said, is that people don't want to appear to be weak and all the rest, the facades that we put on in the law. But what you will find generally is that most people are experiencing the same thing. I don't think we're superhuman and immune to it all. And if it's helpful, I hope I can be a safe space for someone, and you can reach out to me. I'm very happy to have a chat, even if it's just to acknowledge that, hey, you're feeling those things you're feeling. It's normal in some ways, but then also where does it tip over to actually, I think you need some more professional help. And I'm by no means a psychologist, but hopefully can empathize with what people are going through.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. And so once someone has gone through the process of reaching out, whether that be family, friend, a notebook, or EAP, they can hopefully eventually get to a journey where they're starting to recover, and that will look different for everybody. But something to recognize here is that it can be a cycle, and sometimes people will go through ups and downs and they might experience it again, especially if they are still working in a high pressure work context. Do you have any specific coping mechanisms or self-care practices that have been most effective in trying to manage this day to day and keep it at bay and reduce those bumps that might come along?
Definitely. So one that's very easy to put into someone's schedule, just taking a walk outside in the fresh air, and in the sunshine if it's sunny. It's quite sunny right now. I can see some of the light is coming in on my face right now from a window. So just fresh air, sunlight, and rather than sitting at your desk and eating lunch, which I've done before myself, to actually just go out for a 10-minute walk or something. I have found even in the past when I've had really high emotional like conversations like with clients and things, like sometimes I'm just so riled up I couldn't actually just sit down and do my work. I just said to my colleague, I'm like, I just need to go out for a walk and just go out for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That's helpful. Breath work is also helpful, or just like taking a breath, holding it in for 4 and breathing it out for 4. And I have a set of what I call like safety affirmations that I say just when I'm breathing in, I am, and breathing out, safe right now, and just like helping your nervous system calm down. So that's, again, something you could actually do at your desk if you really, and just say it under your breath. And so there's very 2 practical things that you could do on a work day itself. And I think I'm reading this book just finished reading a book called Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal, who, just talks about a whole range of different techniques that you can use in terms of actually when you are feeling that burnout to release it. And part of that can just be actually doing something, say on the weekend, that is not brain heavy. So it could just be whatever people like to do, whether it is cooking. Some people find cooking stressful, but if you enjoy cooking, then to just cook something nice that's for you, just doing something that doesn't actually need to have a dollar value on it. Because I think sometimes in the workplaces, it's always billable time. Everything has to be accounted for, but creating space in your calendar that can actually just be a place that is just for you, and it doesn't have to have any meaning beyond just giving you joy. So I think that's a few practical tips just to help mitigate the stress.
Those are great. I also find that when you're maybe having a low point, you often can't think of the things that you can enjoy that aren't using your brain. So I find it's good to always make a list on your phone of things that you enjoy and makes you happy, so that maybe when you are having a low day, you can go back and revisit that and say, these are the things I actually do like doing. Yes, I do. Maybe I should try one of these, and I'll probably start enjoying it once I get into the activity.
Yes, that is a great tip as well. And I think you're right, because when you're in that stress situation, like you don't want to have to think about it. So having a go-to list of self-care practices is great. Yeah.
And so, after you experienced burnout, you took time to heal and eventually return back into the legal profession. Can you share your experience of re entering the workforce and how it differed from your previous roles and how other people might approach that?
Great question. When I entered back into the legal profession, I will say, and it's no secret because I did tell my current employer this as well, I actually didn't particularly want to practice law because at the time I had such a negative experience previously. Like I said, mentioned earlier, like I actually thought I wasn't going to practice again. It was really more because my partner, my husband, he was feeling, because he'd been quite supportive of me in my leaving the profession. We then became a single income household for a time with still a hefty mortgage and a few other things that we had going on. So he was starting to feel the pressure and a whole bunch of other things that meant that his mental health was at risk. And so for me, I knew that I needed to step up. I was already improving through some of the help that I was getting. And so when I approached my now employer, which actually was a previous work firm that I'd worked with. So we had an existing good relationship, like I left on good terms back in 2019. When I sat down with the managing partner there, like he was very kind and gracious to accept my call. And when I called, and I was just more at the time, I was just saying, look, is there any work available? Like I was very open with the journey that I had experienced. I think like when you've gone through that, like you also know what you don't want in a workplace. So I think I was a lot clearer than say in previous times when often when you do go to an interview, you're wanting to present your best self and I will do anything and everything to support the needs of the firm, and which is still great. And it's great that we have these types of attitudes. But I think it's also then because of my experience, I knew what I wanted in a workplace and what I needed as well. And I actually asked for it. So for me, again, my situation may be very different from others, but for me in that moment, I was like, I actually just don't think I could do full-time work right now. I don't know if I have the capacity. I haven't practiced for 9 months, and really I'm just looking for a job right now. And I was just very honest. And because of that, though, it has then created a situation where because there's honesty on the table, it means that I could actually ask for the terms that I wanted. So I said, look, maybe only 2 to 3 days. And then obviously there has to be a level of give and take. And so they said there was an area in the firm that needed some assistance in the property and commercial space. So I was like, look, it's not employment law, but I'll take it. And the funny thing is that sometimes you can go running away from the things that you thought were not the things that you wanted. But I've personally found that property and commercial work, which I didn't particularly have an interest when I was first in law school, that's actually been the best thing for me. And maybe partly because it is more transactional, it's less adversarial, which can happen in employment law as well, like when people lose their jobs unfairly and dismiss, those kind of things. Yeah, taking that role ended up being a bit of a healing journey for me because it meant, because I was in a different work environment, and this is where we go back to culture, right? I came to this firm and they just allowed me the space to settle in almost reorientate myself with a different practice area of law, and gave me time to, just take it as it comes. And I've been there for just past 2 years now. And I know that when junior lawyers start out, it may not feel like you have that much weight when it comes to dictating your terms and things like that. But I think you still have a level of autonomy in the sense that you can decide the kind of firm that you're going to apply for or the types of jobs that you're going to look at. And there's a lot more variety now than there was when I was first starting out of law school. Like, in-house positions seem to be a lot more accessible now as well. And also even like smaller firms that have a very different culture to the traditional law firm mentality are popping up in Melbourne and across Australia and hopefully New Zealand too. So I think there's much more scope in making some choices that are aligned to what your values are, as opposed to feeling like you have to fit a particular mold and of a particular firm in order to excel in your legal career. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that more university students should be exposed to when they're at university. You just hear of the big law firms that everyone should be applying at to do a clerkship at and then become a graduate at, but a lot of people are more suited to perhaps being in-house or at a boutique law firm. So it's really good to bring that up. And thank you for sharing all of those really practical pieces of advice. Amy, thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable by sharing your experiences. You'll definitely be making it a lot easier for others to share their experiences too. If people would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me, send me a direct message on LinkedIn. I'm also quite active on Instagram as well, which, Sophie, I guess I can give you the links for that. But yeah, it's @_Amy Leong_ on Instagram. And yeah, I'm happy to catch up for a coffee, virtual coffee, or just have a chat in there as well.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of File Notes. To keep up with the latest episodes and content, follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at File Notes Podcast. You can also visit us on our website at vxt.co.nz/podcast/file notes to subscribe to our email list and never miss an episode. That's vxt.co.nz/podcasts/file notes. See you there.